Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Blount, founder of Careers Are Us. Welcome to Where Are the Jobs and How Can We Prepare Our Children for Them? Today, we have Dr. Charlotte Hughes Huntley. Dr. Huntley is a recognized leader in the public health industry. She has over 18 years of successful experience as an accomplished epidemiologist, microbiologist, consultant, career coach, and podcaster. Dr. Huntley serves as the CEO and principal consultant at Dr. C.H. Huntley, LLC, where she offers epidemiologic consulting solutions to organizations within the public health sector. She is passionate about coaching public health professionals, helping them to develop career and business strategies to target goals, take action, and drive positive outcomes. Dr. Huntley, welcome and thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll just jump right on in.
Okay.
Can you tell me a bit about your career path?
I love that question because I love asking that question and I love being asked that question. Let's see if I can make this manageable because I could probably go on a tangent about that. I do have a background in healthcare.
Mhm.
So I spent about half of my career working in medical microbiology. I worked in microbiology labs or housed in hospital systems. So I did, the testing the infections to find out the bacteria that was causing the infections to then help further test to figure out what antibiotics was going to treat that infection. So that's what I did for a very long time and loved it. And then I sort of stumbled into public health and understood more about the bigger impact I could have in public health and fell in love with that aspect as well as the research aspect. So in public health, I began to, at first I thought it was more of a change, but it's really more of an expansion, like a continuation. And I started really focusing on populations that I could serve and all of the experience I had in all those years in healthcare, I just brought that right along with me. So I've been an epidemiologist working in healthcare and really targeting populations on a global scale, as well as on a country level, and then trickling down even to the community level. So it has been a very rewarding career. Lots of lessons learned along the way, lots of bumps and things that really turn into, you think they're bumps and mistakes, but they're really just part of the journey. So it's been incredible. And I'm really very happy with what I've been able to accomplish and do and what I'm doing now. Can't wait to see where we go.
All right. Wow. Wow. That is a very, very interesting career path. And what interests you about epidemiology?
I really could take that back to, there are a lot of things I love about it, but when I was, and I don't want to get too far ahead of your questions, but when I was younger, I knew I was interested in health, the idea of health, the concept of health, being healthier or taking care of the sick or maybe wanting having whole health, good health. That was always something I was interested in. And back then, the only options were the healthcare field. So either you'd be a doctor or you want to be a nurse. And that's what I was taught. That's all we knew. So when I understood public health, and that's the treatment of populations, the focus of populations of people instead of one at a time, that's what I fell in love with. So as an epidemiologist, I can target populations of people. So for example, one of the conditions that I'm really passionate about is type 2 diabetes, because it has wreaked havoc in my family. I watched growing up on my mother's side of the family, lost too many family members early from uncontrolled diabetes. So I was always interested in that. As a medical doctor, you treat one patient at a time. You're prescribing, you're following, you're treating. But there's only so many hours in a day, so many patients you can impact. When I understood public health and populations of people, now I can target women who have type 2 diabetes, or African American women, if I want to get really specific, who have type 2 diabetes, or the women in the southeastern region of the US, because we're called the diabetes belt. We have a higher prevalence of diabetes in the southeastern part of the country than other parts of the country. So if I target those populations, I can have a bigger impact. I can help more people. And that's what I love about epidemiology. That is the big draw for me, is I feel like I'm having a bigger impact. The problems that I care about are big problems. So I feel that I can have a bigger impact focusing on populations instead of just the individual.
Mhm. Wow, wow. Now, what type of education, training, and background does it require to become an epidemiologist?
It is, and now it continues to change. And I hesitate a little bit because when I first started targeting this career, I started graduate school, worked on a master's. I completed the master's and I further specialized and completed my doctorate. And it really well prepared me. And in the meantime, I've noticed that a lot of programs back in the old days, I could say, the public health programs weren't available on the like undergraduate level college, but now there are a lot of programs. So someone can get a bachelor's degree in public health, and under that umbrella of public health, they'll be trained in some aspect of epidemiology, and they could then go into the career field with a bachelor's degree, but you can certainly, that's an entry point into the field of epidemiology with a bachelor's degree. So someone can complete a bachelor's and get started in the career field of public health and work in epidemiology and learn and gain skills and then progress along. Most people will have a master's degree as an epidemiologist, but like I said, there's so many programs that are offered on the undergraduate level that a lot of students are coming out with a bachelor's degree and getting into the field.
Where did you go to school?
Well, I completed my graduate level education online. So I went to Walden University and completed my master's degree in public health. And then I returned to Walden and completed my doctorate and specialized in epidemiology. And so that was about 9 years while working at the same time in public health. So I was completing my education in public health and specializing, but I was also working in public health, and it was a great experience because it allowed me to apply what I was learning like in real time. As I learned, it was just being made real to me at the same time. So it was a good pattern, a good path.
Now, what skills, abilities, and personal attributes are essential to be successful in this particular field?
I think that anyone who is inquisitive, because that's going to speak to that research side of things. You question causes and why and connections and look for associations. Okay. Like myself, I noticed, well, all these people in my family have type 2 diabetes, and what are the connections? Why are we having all these issues? Why are my aunties and uncles getting sick so early? And why, that inquisitive nature, questioning things related to health. I think that's a good indication right there. That speaks to that research aspect. Looking for anyone who has an affinity for numbers and the math, maybe not so much the algebra part of math, but the statistical parts of math, where math, it tells the story. Because epidemiology really comes down to a lot with the numbers. We look for patterns and trends, and that's numbers, and the data and the numbers tell a story. So anyone who has drawn to math and visualization, charts and graphs and things like that, those are good signs. And I think the other probably good skill to have is communication. It's not emphasized enough, in my opinion. So a good communicator, someone who can, who takes that scientific jargon, but who also can explain that and interpret that in a way that people on the same level, their colleagues, can understand, but also the general population that's maybe non-scientific can understand. So anyone who has, those type of skills are really good people to be put into this field.
Now, this is kind of a follow-up to what you said really initially interested you about this field was you had a good number of relatives who had type 2 diabetes. Just curious, What did you find out? Because I'm sure that we'll probably have a lot of viewers who are in the same situation.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and we do hear a lot about these sort of general things in maybe on the internet or in different settings and arenas. We're sort of in an age of information overload, so we have a lot of great information, but they sometimes come from institutions that and I say we as African-American woman in the Black community, we historically have a little bit of reservation when it comes down to where we're getting the scientific information. What do we believe? What do we trust? What can we trust? Mm-hmm. So I think the information, a lot of the answers and the information is available. We just sometimes maybe don't trust it, or there's so much and it conflicts that it's hard to sift through and figure out what's really good and what's not so good. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of things that are within our control. And when it comes down to type 2 diabetes, that are behavioral. So when it comes down, you hear people talk about, regular exercise, physical activity, watching what you eat, those types of things are foundational, good, strong, solid principles to follow. And we do have the challenges of the lifestyles that we have. We're busy, fast food is the go-to. And sometimes it's even hard to figure out what's healthy and what's not. It's all disguised nowadays. So that's like an ongoing challenge, but it really does come down to a lot of what is within our control. So my mother is 87, and I'm blessed to have every day with her, and it's really rewarding. But my mother has always had, as far as I can remember, had type 2 diabetes. I'm sure there was an actual point where she was diagnosed, but in my mind, she's always had type 2 diabetes. But she watched her mother, and her mother died early, and my mother decided that she had to do something, to take care of herself. So she started, she took all her medicine like she should. She tried to change a little bit of the eating. She did a little something. She changed, cut away some of the fats, the way she cooked things. So as I started learning more, I started just teaching and explaining that. And sometimes she'd get really tired of me because I was like this little know-it-all kid. But she started, we started this little, I want to say it's sort of a game that we have. So what I started doing was just kind of taking what I was learning and sharing it with my mother and with my other family members that would pay attention in a way that completely respected their perspective. Because you can't disrespect, where someone's made things a certain way. It's a cultural feel, and you can't just, shove all this information at them at once, but it can be a give and take. So over time, we've been able to share those little tidbits. So it really comes down to watching how you cook things. Sometimes try substituting different food items to help reduce the fat. You don't have to give up completely what you love. At Thanksgiving, we're going to have some of our favorites. There's going to be sweet potato pie on the table. But so little things we'll do is, cut a smaller piece instead of the bigger piece. Being mindful of portions and just kind of, compromising and giving yourself a lot of grace to kind of integrate those things in. But a lot of those lifestyle changes go a long way. I think of it as little steps, little things we can start to do instead of trying to accomplish, trying to get everything done at one time. And it's just a process. But some of those little things like that can really go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's going to be extremely helpful for, I'm sure, a number of people who might look at this video. Now, what are some of the common career paths for epidemiologists or people in this field?
So I love your questions. I love this platform because I like that people are hearing it earlier, and children they need to be able to be exposed to the true options, because a lot of children who are interested in health or drawn to any aspect of health, it's a great idea to understand those different, options. Absolutely. So public health itself is a broad field, very broad field. And under that is epidemiology. And then you've got all sorts of, program planning and management and policy and all these different aspects. But even when you get to epidemiology, within epidemiology, there are a number of directions you can go. So there's because you can't just kind of know it all and be an expert on every type of disease and condition. So in epidemiology, some people may be, for example, drawn to cancer research. So cancer epidemiology is a whole specific career path all by itself. So you can target the different types of cancers and how they affect different people in different communities, in different countries, different age groups, even by gender. You can break it down. And so people spend their entire career as an epidemiologist just focusing on cancer epidemiology. And then you've got an area where infectious diseases, where people are, a great example is with our pandemic that we're in right now. We've got infectious disease epidemiologists who are, this is right their element, the outbreak. So they're watching the cases increase. These are numbers, cases increases. They're looking for associations. They're trying to make projections about where they think the trend is going. And they're trying to assess and learn and analyze this data. So there's people who park their entire career on like infectious disease epidemiology, and they'll go from one outbreak to the next, because we've got our pandemic that is completely unknown, but then we'll have outbreaks of, say, salmonella. You read about that in the news, or an outbreak of like the flu season and things like that. So we've got infectious disease. And then we've got chronic disease epidemiologists. So those are the people that are looking at like diabetes, like I just described, because that's not something you get and you're sick for a couple of weeks and then it goes away. That's something that lasts the long haul. So chronic diseases like diabetes and arthritis and, conditions like that, we've got, that umbrella. So those are some of the different places that people can go. And my guidance is always to lead with what's in your heart. And you can find a niche for that in epidemiology. For me, I give you an example of, diabetes and what that means to me in my family. I can always find, I'm going to gravitate to that, of all the topics I'll look at. Infectious disease will catch my attention. But if diabetes is in the mix, I'm going to gravitate to that naturally. So when people can kind of identify what they're naturally interested in, then they can find their epidemiology in that topic.
Now, what do you enjoy most about the work that you do?
I thought about this a lot. Right now, I can tell you that what I enjoy the most is the impact that I believe I'm able to have. Like I talked about, being able to have a bigger impact was always really important to me. So regardless of what I'm actually working on, whether it's an infectious disease project, if I'm sitting in on COVID sessions about something, I walk away from that knowing that my input, my actions will have a big impact. And that is that's very rewarding to me, to know that we always talk about wanting to make a difference. So at the end of a hard day for me, I feel like I've made a difference.
What do you enjoy the least, or what do you find most challenging?
I think sometimes the systems. Sometimes it can get a little too political and move away from what I consider, the real root, the cause, what we're really trying to target. We can get distracted because of the politics that get involved when you're dealing with health and populations of people. I mean, it's going to naturally show up, but sometimes that is the most frustrating thing, to be with a group of my colleagues trying to work through a situation, or even if there's something that I want to do and I see how I can impact a change. And if I've got these political hurdles to that slow me down or get in the way, that can be very frustrating.
What do you wish you had known when you were starting out in this career?
Before I knew about public health, when I was starting out on the healthcare side of things, I wish I understood public health back then. Now, I don't have regrets because I had a very rewarding stretch working in healthcare, but I really wish I understood public health back then. And I think I probably would have still gone the path, but I would have been better prepared maybe, when I got to the decision to move into public health. And then probably at the beginning of my public health journey, I wish I knew the people that I now I'm associated with. I wish I had more mentors that looked like me, if I can say it any better, because I started out feeling like I understood epidemiology. I wanted to be an epidemiologist. I worked in an area where I had good mentors, but in terms of public epidemiologists, I could not find anyone that looked like me. And it was years and years into my career as an epidemiologist before I realized, wow, where have all of you been? And that is that's the thing. If I could change anything, I would. That's it. I mean, when my daughter was in school and there was ever, Mom, I need you to come talk to the students about. I always made time for that reason. I wanted those kids to see me talking about the things I was doing, because that representation really matters. That's one thing I really wish I had early on.
And that leads perfectly into my next question. Why is there a need for more African-American epidemiologists?
I wish I had the time to go into this. There is, on top of what I just explained.
Yeah.
I don't. Okay, so we need to have epidemiologists that are representing the Black community, serving the Black community, talking about the data that's in the Black community. It is so important to have that inward perspective, someone who can relate to the things that are almost unspoken and unsaid, and to represent that population, not from the outside looking in, but from the inside looking out. It is important from that perspective, because it's important that the stories that need to be told, so much has been suppressed, so much has been covered, so much has been inaccurately described, and so much is still lacking. We don't have years and years of data on that represent the Black community, for lack of, for not having that representation, the mistrust, the misconceptions. And so we're still kind of lagging behind. You can't go back and all of a sudden make up 300 years of data and bring us up to speed. So we need that representation for a lot of those reasons, as well as just not just what it means for little Black children to see someone who looks like them in that role, but I think for all children to see. I think it's just so important that children are growing up with their eyes wide open, and it's not shocking when they see, oh, my doctor's a Black woman. No, they shouldn't flinch, and that happens when there's that representation everywhere.
Now, what suggestions would you share with elementary and middle school parents on ways to help their children be ready if their child decides to pursue a career as an epidemiologist in college? Specifically, what courses should a student take in middle and high school to prepare?
I know this is improving. Some high schools, even in my area, I've noticed they have public health programs on the high school level, where they're introducing in their health science centers, they're introducing students to allied health careers, and they're starting to mix public health in there, which is great. I think that the more we see that, the better. So the more there are courses where they introduce a very introductory level of public health, even just the broad spectrum of public health being introduced in high school is great. You can trickle that down to middle school. And when we have career days and trying to encourage, and so school administration, faculty, they should really seek out public health professionals to bring in to introduce these careers to children at a very young age. And it could be as simple. I think I'm a huge fan. Whenever we can press the easy button, we should go for it, right? So here's an easy way to do this. If they only focused on explaining to young children the difference between healthcare and public health, that would go a long way. Just that one thing right there. Like, they don't even have to worry about the title so much, but if children could just, if they explain what a doctor does versus what an epidemiologist does, because an epidemiologist could still be a doctor. So explain public health versus healthcare. They work extremely well together. We need them both together. But unfortunately, most kids, when they think health, they think a doctor or a nurse, and they need to understand the difference. That would be huge. And then as they get older, those kids are naturally going to start asking questions. And so that if they're interested based off of that experience, that understanding early, when they get to middle school and high school, and they're having to do these projects and they're going to these little health fairs, they're going to start questioning, well, where's the epidemiologist? Because they told me about this in fourth grade, and I've been, those kinds of things. I think that's like an easy win, an easy way to drop that in the early elementary age.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would guess that when students sometimes say, the typical, why am I learning this? I will never have an opportunity to use this when I grow up. Reading skills are very, very important. And based on what you said about probability being an important task or field that students should be familiar with, reading, math, communicating, you mentioned, are all skills that parents should help their children develop. Right?
I agree. I really agree with that. I think nothing goes to waste, because so often you don't know exactly what you need from that until, later on. But sometimes the way that they're thinking as they're working out some of these problems, that thinking, that thought process becomes so important as an epidemiologist and just in the field of public health. So yeah, I definitely reading is very important, because we do a lot of reading with the research studies and reading for comprehension, being able to read it. And here's another thing I just thought about. Parents can really encourage their students when they're reading to reflect back. Get your students to your children to explain to you what they read. This is something I do with my children. It would irritate them so badly. But when they come to me and ask a question, Mom, what does this mean? It's like, you tell me. That's a good question. I was like, oh, come on. I'm like, no, because if you look it up, you'll understand. And then if you can come back and explain it to me, then that lets me know that you really do understand what you're talking about. And they're going to remember that. And that's a great way to get them to read for comprehension, making sure they're understanding what they're reading. But those reading skills, you're right, are so important.
Should high school students reach out to people in the field and request informational interviews or other opportunities to learn more about the day in the life of an epidemiologist? Do you know if there are programs out there? Just someone who looks at this and thinks that they might have an interest, but they want more information before they maybe invest in college studies in this field?
That's a great question. And I think that certainly you can start with, or any student that's interested can start with finding schools, universities that offer school public health degree programs, and reaching out and asking what activities they have where they can, sit in on a session or find a mentor, or even if they're talking to students, if they're high school students and they're talking to college students who are maybe juniors, senior, almost, at that graduating point, that can be really, really helpful. A good conversation, a good mentor relationship. I think reaching out to, if they find someone in the field who is willing to, have a conversation with them, ask some questions, answer some questions, I think that's a great thing. There are some good podcasts now. I'm a podcaster, and one of the reasons I started the podcast I interview a variety of guests from different fields in public health, including epidemiology, but not limited to epidemiology, and just hearing their journey into public health. Now, it is targeting more of the graduate level degree people, or maybe the undergraduate students, but I think that any high schooler who's interested, it's great to tune into a podcast like that, because they'll hear these journeys. They'll hear how they'll talk about, what they studied in undergrad and how they kind of explored on the way through, and hearing those stories are helpful. But there's also a lot of other podcasts as well. But I think that's a great resource for any high schooler that's interested in trying to just kind of explore that. And I really encourage them to do that. And if they can't find a program like opportunity in their high school for that, then one of the things, like I said, reaching to upperclassmen and university settings. And now we're not limited to like the local university. You can go online to any university and access their program, and then just kind of start asking those questions. But I think they'll find people who are willing to talk about it. And I think that would be a great way to go.
Mm-hmm. Now, how would they find your podcast?
It's called Public Health Epidemiology Careers Podcast, and it's in Apple Podcasts, it's in Spotify, It's on most places where podcasts are found. And then also from my website. So drchuntley.com, they can access all of the podcasts from there as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, are there any questions I'm not asking that you think I should have?
I think if I just was to add anything in there, it would just be to take inspired action. I think that this can be kind of intimidating to, if you do find an epidemiologist or you find someone in public health, because they usually have a lot of letters behind their name. It can be intimidating to try to reach out to those people. And sometimes you can reach out and they won't respond and you feel like, oh gosh, I'm scared, I'm not gonna do that again. But take inspired action. If there's an interest, keep reaching out until you find someone who has the time or who's interested in speaking with you, because I think that will just go a long way. So whether it's the student listening and thinking about it, or the parents for the students, or just working together on that, but just take inspired action. If there's interest, explore it, ask questions, keep on going until you find a good network of people that, are interested in talking with you. I think I've got so many of the people I've interviewed on my podcast who are willing to share their information, and they are happy to reach out to people. So there is that good group there that would be happy to speak with students.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, in my intro for you, you are also a coach. So if someone views this who is in college or graduated with a public health degree, how do you help people as a coach?
So that evolved. I started the podcast as a mentoring platform, but people were listening to the podcast and then reaching out with more questions and wanting more help, more specific targeted help. So that's where my coaching, kind of picked up. So I help graduate students or even undergraduate students, if they're current students in public health, working toward their careers in public health. One of the biggest things I've found is, they get caught up in the busyness, doing the assignments, and they're used to doing what they're told. Finish this course to make sure you meet all the requirements to get your degree. And they think that they're magically going to graduate and then just walk up to Mr. Employer and say, here's my diploma, where's my job, where do I sit, where do I work? And it doesn't work like that. There's all these gaps there. So I teach how to network, and how to build your network, because networking is so important, and using specifically online platforms like LinkedIn. I teach in my coaching and working with students and even recent graduates, because they'll often get to the point where they've graduated, they've been working on trying to find that job, and they're having a hard time. And they're usually lacking experience. So they got the degree, but the people who are getting picked up really quickly are the ones that have also gained experience along the way. So another big part of what I do is help them get creative. How do you, how can you get experience, especially right now in the pandemic, and we're restricted to so much. Well, there are a lot of ways you can do this using online tools and technology. And so I teach and I work with people who are really trying to figure that out and get that competitive edge. And then I guess beyond that, more I have a group that maybe they come from one background and they add on a public health degree, and they're trying to figure out how to kind of transition from one thing into another, or how to kind of pull this together. Mm-hmm. And they look at me because I've done that, where I've pulled the healthcare and the public health together, and they're trying to figure out how to pull their different backgrounds together. So I work with people who are really in that kind of a niche.
You have so many different experiences, but it's as though all paths lead together. It's every experience you have benefited you for the next journey, I guess. Yeah. Wow. This has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and I'm sure our viewers will benefit from everything that you shared. So thank you so much, Dr. Huntley.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure, and I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate the work that you're doing. So it's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And thank you all for viewing.